So 3, 2, 1.
So what we will be discussing in our presentation, our final presentation, is we're gonna have a brief comparison of the UN's actions and its effectiveness of prevention and prosecution. And the two cases where we will be looking at is Rwanda and Myanmar, specifically the Rohingya people. So to start off, the United Nations focuses on maintaining human rights, issue international laws issues for states, and solve capable conflicts that they can. The UN has been involved in conflicts across the world, in particular the Middle East and mostly Africa. The two conflicts we will be looking at is Rwanda and Myanmar. We would also be discussing the role of the UN in each of these conflicts in depth. We also look at their history and like what's up to date. We would also discuss similarities and differences of Rwanda and Myanmar, of what the UN had responded to and what they had achieved and didn't achieve. Finally, we would understand the UN's effectiveness in handling genocides. We would also see like their success and what they did and didn't do. Right. So to recap, the UN's framework on genocide, the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime Genocide, they categorized 5 types of genocide, like where they step in. The 5 are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life designed to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. These are the 5 types of genocides where the UN has to step in and do something about it. There is also a special advisor on the prevention of genocide to oversee when is the best possible time to the UN to get involved. And there's also a special advisor on the responsibility to protect. That's the law that gives the right to the United Nations to intervene. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Camilla on the Rwanda genocide.
Hello, so I'm gonna cover the history of Rwanda genocide. I'm gonna start by talking what it is. Genocide in Rwanda was a brutal mass slaughter that took place in 1994 from April to July over the 100 days, killing over 800,000 of ethnic Tutsi and political moderate Hutu people. Calvin, next slide, please. Thank you. Rwanda is a small country about the size of Maryland, located near the center of Africa. It is separated from the Democratic Republic of Congo to the west. It's bounded on the north by Uganda, to the east by Tanzania, and to the south by Burundi. The capital, Kigali, is located in the center of the country. As of 1994, the population of Rwanda was estimated at 7 million, with 85% of the population in the Hutu ethnic group, 14% in Tutsi, and just 1% in Twa. The Rwanda genocide itself began with mass killings in Kigali, but over the course of its 100-day duration, killings spread to all corners of the country. About 80% of Rwandans who are Hutus had dominated the country for the longest time. In 1959, the Hutus overthrew the Tutsi monarchy, and tens of thousands of Tutsis fled to the neighboring countries, including Uganda. A group of Tutsis exiled formed a rebel group called Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, which invaded Rwanda in 1990 and was fighting until 1993, where the peace deal was arranged. On the night of 6 April 1994, a plane carrying the president at the time and the counterpart party both of them who were Hutus, were shot and killed. Hutu extremists blamed the RPF and immediately started a well-organized campaign of slaughter. Calvin, next slide, please. The UN actions and inactions during Rwanda genocide were seen to be the largest stain on the UN. UN had done very little in the eyes of the world in response to the genocide happening at the time. Cables and messages sent from the ground had expressed real concern of a violent movement along ethnic lines, but the leadership of the UN's peacekeeping mission, Kofi Annan, was received but never pushed forward towards the Security Council. In Article 2, it is stated that genocide consists of certain acts committed with an intent to destroy in whole or in part national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. And the debate about terminology regarding whether Rwanda was a genocide or not created a lot of delay in handling the conflict. The UN was only able to act if the crisis was known as genocide. This would have mobilized UN's forces on the fact that they have ratified the Genocide Convention of 1948. UN members had debated whether it was true or not, creating very long delay in action and furthering the conflict. This had created a distraction for the real problem at hand, wasting time on what is the correct definition, which took away an effort which could be put towards the handling the conflict. Now I'm gonna hand it off to Calvin.
Hi, so I will be discussing the historical context of the Rohingya crisis. The historical context of Myanmar starts with its colonial past. Myanmar, with its colonial name of Burma, was part of British India, consolidating of modern-day India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Myanmar. The tensions started during a period of colonization when the British had tripled the Rohingya Muslim population for infrastructure projects from the neighboring region of Bengal. Myanmar, which was and still is predominantly Buddhist, found these actions as unequal and deplorable. The Rohingya had benefited greatly being at the whim of British rule while still being the minority in the region. During the Second World War, the Rohingya had sided with Great Britain in exchange for a national Muslim area in Myanmar, while the Burmese nationalists had sided with the Japanese in exchange for their independence. While the Allied powers may have won the war, Great Britain did not live up to its promise of granting the Rohingya an autonomous state, and in turn had granted independent rule to the Burmese who had supported the Allied effort. After independence, tensions had escalated between the majority ethnic group Bamar and the Rohingya Muslims when the Rohingya wanted to secede and crackdowns were established in 1978. Buddhist leaders were in place of the Rakhine State, the home of the Rohingya, and those people who were in the area were not granted many political freedoms. Legislation required all Rohingyas to be registered and were not included as citizens, meaning they were stateless. These actions had led to the exodus of 200,000 Rohingyas towards Bangladesh, and they had reported accounts of widespread evictions, rapes, and murders. A second law in 1982 stated that all persons who had migrated under British rule to Myanmar were considered as illegal aliens, which included almost all the Rohingyas. These crackdowns and restrictions had continued throughout the decades but had taken a turn for the worse in 2016, when clashes between the Rohingya independence fighters and the Burmese military and police had resulted in the death of few of the policemen. This had led to a violent crackdown of the Rohingyas, labeling them as terrorists and justify the crackdowns in the name of religious stability and to promote homogeneity among its people. The crackdowns had led to a burning of a couple hundred villages, 120,000 Rohingyas internally displaced, and about 250,000 had fled to neighboring countries, such primarily as Bangladesh. Mass murder, rapes, and displacement had taken over the last couple years of the crisis. Approximately 100,000 Rohingyas have died during the conflict and may not be the end of the bloodshed. This graph shows how many people were displaced during the times of crisis since 1970s. Many NGOs, states, and the UN had expressed concern and interest in the conflict and have posed several positions. Today, we'll look at the UN response for the Rohingya crisis, narrated by Ava. Thank you.
Hello, so I'm going to be doing talking about the UN's presence in Myanmar, and I'm going to start with their early presence. So they've had a presence in Myanmar since the 1950s, but Myanmar was not on their agenda of the General Assembly until 1993, and on the Committee of Human Rights, the Council of Human Rights since 1992. And since this time, the UN has been working to end civil war in Myanmar and promote democratization. Post 2008, they increased their assistance in 2008 due to a cyclone, and after that, they established more and more agencies to assist the crisis in Myanmar. And in 2014, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights was consistently calling out human rights violations as well, along with other officials, and they got more critical as time went on, but they were not well supported by any action by the other parts of the UN through any actions because of concerns of the political ramifications of doing so. In 2017, a resolution was drafted, but Myanmar, along with other countries, voted against it because they believed that it was politically motivated as opposed to focusing on actual human rights issues. And the Human Rights Council created an independent fact-finding mission, the final report of which was presented in 2018. And the council reacted saying, quote, that they are welcoming the work of the independent international fact-finding mission on Myanmar and its oral updates to the Human Rights Council, while deeply regretting that the government of Myanmar has not cooperated with the fact-finding mission and urging the government to grant it full, unrestricted, and unmonitored access to all areas and interlocutors. End quote. So next slide. So a little further analysis of the response. There's kind of two areas of like the response. So the first was in Myanmar, and the issues that came had to do with the governmental divide in Myanmar, because there were like two areas which had like two different issues, and if they were like helping one area, or they could provoke the other, and then there could be further problems and further divide. Also, there's a very strong nationalism in Myanmar, and they are not there, and there's a lot of mistrust of any external actors, which would also create a problem. And even though they were allowed to establish presence in Myanmar, they're still under a lot of scrutiny from officials and leaders and such. But what they did in Myanmar, the concept was called principal engagement, which, as opposed to what's called isolation, when you just call a country out and put sanctions on them, or like full engagement, which probably means to completely take over. Principal engagement is just going in, working with the government and other groups to try to improve the situation. And in terms of the staff, the UN staff in Myanmar, there was increasing polarization because of everything that was going on. People started having very got more emotional and had about their positions and of what's happening. So there was some infighting, and on occasion it got into the public eye, which would not have further complicate their actions. And the other part of this is in the UN. So first, as I've talked about before, the concerns about about the contradiction between the UN Charter, which its main thing is state sovereignty, but the fact that the UN, in order to help, they have to go to the country, they have to establish something in the country, and that's a bit contradictory. So there's still that. The next part is the Security Council. There's division in the Security Council, and this is a big problem because the Security Council needs to approve any action that the UN might want to take. So Russia and China vetoed a lot of things, which caused problems. There were competing positions from officials. For example, the Deputy 20 Secretary General favored a more robust posture of the United Nations to address the events in the Rakhine state, while the Special Advisor argued for quiet diplomacy to exert increasing influence on the host government. There were next there was issues with coordination, which probably has to do with the bureaucracy. And while it's good that they have a lot of different parts of the UN to deal with different things, this could mean that information could become unclear because everybody is only human and things can happen, and that's natural, but it can further complicate things. Of course, always politics is an issue, that they start caring more about the political ramifications, and the job of the resident coordinator in Myanmar became more political in nature, and also this person did not have enough support or guidance while in Myanmar. Also, the information that they collected, they did a fact-finding mission, but the information might not necessarily be completely reliable because they don't quite know if it was collected properly, or sometimes the information was not communicated with everybody that it needed to be communicated with. So that could also complicate things. And finally, there was no indication that they invoked the word genocide, which was important in then invoking the Genocide Convention and what all that entails. So with that, I will give it back to Calvin.
So I will be doing an analysis of the conflict. Has the UN in Myanmar implemented the same lessons learned from its failures in the Rwanda genocide? First, we'll discuss the hesitation to declare atrocity crimes. The debate about terminology regarding Rwanda as a genocide has created much delay in its handling of the conflict. The UN was only able to act if the crisis in Rwanda was unequivocally known as a genocide. This would have mobilized UN forces on the fact that they had ratified the Genocide Convention of 1948. UN members had debated whether or not it was truly one, creating a delay in action and furthering the conflict. This has created a distraction at hand to the real problem. Wasting time, or what is the correct definition, took away time and effort that could have been put towards handling the conflict. This had also happened in Myanmar, where countries had been disgusted by the Rohingya crisis, called it an atrocity with genocidal intent. By not using the proper language to invoke the Genocide Convention and the duties that come along with it, more time is wasted debating whether or not if it's a crisis that is deemed enough importance of their assistance. Second, we'd like to note is the Security Council's failings to meet their obligations. Non-intervention can be seen as a complementary part of the first point. In the Security Council, where many resolutions and actions happen in that chamber, it remains relatively stagnant due to the crises that they are tasked with examining. The US did not want to get involved in Rwanda due to its previous conflict in Somalia. That conflict had led to a public embarrassment, and 18 US soldiers had died during that conflict. This did not give the US any political capital to invest into Rwanda. China is involved with the Myanmar crisis because of its long-standing policy of non-intervention, where states handle their own internal affairs. This had led to a prelude of how China does not want to shine a spotlight on crimes against humanity on its neighboring country, as well as it may veer into China's dealings with their own human rights abuses, such as the crisis in Xinjiang with their Muslim Uyghur population. These UN members have the power to independently say that these conflicts are not worthy of intervention or assistance that can help mediate the violence. With stagnation from the Security Council, one can expect a deadlock or inaction to result from their deliberations. A new protocol was in place to preventing these types of conflicts. The responsibility to protect doctrine was created in 2001 to prevent other horrific crimes from occurring. We see that in Myanmar, that R2P was not invoked in that conflict and could have changed the course in many people's lives if used correctly. So now I would like to pass this over to Shakira to continue the analysis. Thank you. So to continue the analysis, I'd like to reiterate from what I said before, the Human Rights Council had created an independent fact-finding mission on Myanmar and found that these problems existed and are similar to what happened in Rwanda. The Security Council had adopted no binding resolution on Myanmar because of China's intervention in Myanmar's internal affairs. R2P was a doctrine that was created to prevent these kinds of atrocities, but then with no real substantive process from the Security Council, we don't see that R2P can be an effective process or protocol for preventing other genocides without the consent of the Security Council. And hesitations and political calculations make all this as more complicated than usual, with debates about terminology and the inability of the UN to act without the Security Council authorization. It just creates a perfect storm of crises being not able to be handled and preventing the further loss of life. In conclusion, while there have been such improvements between Rwanda and Myanmar, such as the fact-finding missions and involvement from other nations to call out the atrocities in Myanmar, it is still a work in progress. Similarities between the two conflicts have outweighed the preventive protocols in place against genocide. A lack of political will and wasteful debates have removed the importance of the situation and moved the focus onto non-important topics that have not helped any of the situations that will occur or that may occur in the future. Further work by the UN and improvements are needed for a more robust response to not allow another incident like these to happen again. Thank you.